Welcome to So-and-So, brought to you by BERNINA, made to create. I'm Meg Goodman, and you're about to enjoy a casual conversation with honorary members of the sewist and quilting community. A conversation about how they got started, what inspires them, what excites them, and their connection to this community. Today we're threading together sewing and fate with some of the extraordinary people behind one of the most innovative and visually striking films of the year, So Torn. It's a thriller, a dark comedy, and a stitched-together cinematic wonder that explores how every decision unravels a different destiny. In So Torn, Barbara Duggen, the mobile seamstress, stumbles upon a drug deal gone wrong. Faced with a suitcase full of cash and 2 injured men, she must choose what's next. Each decision plays out in a unique timeline with wildly different and increasingly dangerous consequences. The result is a story of grief, survival, and redemption, where thread becomes both weapon and lifeline. Joining me are the father and son creative team behind the film. Freddy Macdonald, the 24-year-old youngest ever directing fellow at the American Film Institute. Freddy's debut feature, So Torn, premiered at South by Southwest and headlined the Locarno Film Festival's Piazza Grande. His thesis film, Shedding Angels, won a Student Academy Award and was shortlisted for a BAFTA. So Torn was acquired by Vertigo Releasing and Sunrise Films and opened theatrically nationwide. Alongside him is his father and producing partner, Fred Macdonald, a seasoned media executive and writer whose companies have collaborated with Disney, DreamWorks, Lionsgate, and more. As former CEO of Olive Jar Studios, Fred led creative for award-winning theme park media and advertising campaigns, including a Clio Gold-winning Coca-Cola spot. Also joining us is the magnetic Irish actor Eve Conley, a graduate of Dublin's Gaiety School of Acting. Eve launched her screen career in Into the Badlands and has since appeared in The Other Lamb, Vikings, and Wild River. In So Torn, she brings grit and emotion to her role as Barbara, a woman who sews her way out of impossible circumstances. We'll talk about how sewing literally powers this film, from embroidered talking portraits to stitched title cards to intricate Rube-Goldberg style thread rigs. And we'll explore how the film's visual and emotional complexity reflects the choices we make and the ones that make us. It's a bit of a longer episode, so settle in and hold on to your sewing tables as we dive into the layered world of So Torn. Fred and Freddy, welcome to So-and-So.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, it's wonderful to be here.
Your film is amazing, and I can't wait to talk about this. And of course, there is the sewing theme in here, so we're going to have a good time with this. I'd like to start out with a clip which is really a foretelling description of what's to come. So let's take a listen.
Choices. 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 Perfect crime. Call police. Drive away. Perfect crime. Call police. Drive away. Perfect crime. Call police. Drive away.
Barbara, you'll keep this store alive.
So this movie is complex, and it's an intricate piece of cinematography. It's pretty amazing. How did you come up with this story, and why a sewing theme?
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy story of how it all came together. The feature film, the So Torn feature film, is based on a short film of the same name, which was actually my application film to film school. I was in high school, living in Switzerland, and my dad and I, Fred, we love to co-write, and we were trying to think of a film that could get me into any school, essentially. And the number one school I wanted to go to was AFI, and that's the American Film Institute in Los Angeles. And their application prompt was to tell a story in 5 minutes about a change of heart. And so we started brainstorming a concept of what we could do there. And we were very much inspired by the work of our heroes, the Cohen brothers, and specifically No Country for Old Men, and that premise of coming upon a drug deal gone bad. And we wanted to take that setup that we've seen many times before and spin it on its head with a character, a protagonist we had never seen in that context before. And we very quickly came up with a seamstress just because we felt it was, a complete juxtaposition to that world. But once we started brainstorming, we just loved all the other contrasts that came with it, with her thread and the blood and the guns. And we wanted to find a way to make this seamstress come out on top with that cash, that briefcase. And so we made the short film, and we didn't think much of it. Where my sister is a sewer, she sews, so that's actually we used her sewing box in the film, for example. So we had all the thread we needed, and we made the short film and sent it out to the world. We sent it out to film schools, and it was just this incredibly lucky situation where it ended up getting passed along and ended up in the hands of Joel Cohen of the Coen brothers, who inspired the whole piece. And he wanted to meet for coffee, and he was incredibly kind. And he said, the first thing he said was, you guys should continue to work together as a father-son team. It's so special to work with family, and you have to keep doing that. And the second thing he said was, turn this into a feature film and do it the Blood Simple method. Do it independently. Go to anyone you know with money and raise the money so you can maintain creative control. And that's what we did.
I have to ask, the Coen brothers are your heroes and inspiration, and you get a call from Joel Cohen saying, this is a great movie. What was that like?
My dad can jump in here and speak to this too, but we were terrified. And do you want to speak to that, Dad?
I'm just going to jump in and say that I want to say one thing. When we finished the short film, Freddy edited it in, a night. So it was very quick. And I never forget, he brought it to school. He was in high school. He brought it to his high school class the next morning and was so excited to show it. And he got kind of a mixed response. People they weren't jumping all over it. Some people liked it. Some people were like, oh, whatever. And so it was kind of a bummer because we thought it was really good. And I almost didn't send it out to people. I almost was like, well, maybe this isn't very good. But I did end up sending it to a friend of mine, Peter Spears, who's a well-known producer who did Call Me by Your Name, Nomadland, and he took about a week before he got back to me. But then he called me from the set. I think they were shooting Nomadland, and he said, he said, do you have a pencil? I've got like 1 minute. And I said, yeah. What is it? He said, I have 3 pieces of information to tell you. The first is Joel Cohen watched the short and he loves it and he wants to meet with you and Freddy for coffee. The second piece of information I have is that Searchlight wants to buy the short film and put it in theaters with, as a kind of a short before one of their feature films. And the third piece of information is Rich Klubeck, who represents the Coen brothers at UTA, and he also represents Wes Anderson. He wants to represent Freddy as a director. So this all happened while Freddy was still just a high school senior. This is before he had even, before AFI had even seen the film. And so we had to immediately book flights to go to LA to we met with Peter, we met with Joel Cohen, we met with Searchlight, we met with UTA. And this is all before Freddy's interview with AFI. He got the interview with AFI, but I said to him when we were pulling into their driveway, because he was so nervous about the interview, I said, you have to tell them when you first walk in the room what has happened with the short film. Because it was just incredible how they were all just green lights one after the other. Because usually those things don't happen. Usually, Joel Cohen, you have a meeting set up and then it gets canceled, or Searchlight cancels the meeting, and it all just happened at once.
It was pretty remarkable, and those were 3 really nice pieces of information he gave you in a minute.
He gave it, and then what was funny is, it actually wasn't funny, it was a little frightening, but Freddy was up in his room, we were in Switzerland, and I was shaking. Because I'd just written down these 3 things, and even just one of those things would have been incredible. And I said, Freddy, you got to come downstairs. And my voice, I guess, was kind of shaky or whatever.
I thought someone died. I was like, what happened? And then when you told me the news, it's just life-changing news. And I was just in tears probably for a week.
That's pretty special.
Yeah. So Peter Spears, he was responsible for all this. I mean, he really he saw he saw what the film was and it. But the point in all this is that it almost didn't go to him because of the mixed reviews it got in Freddy's high school class.
Interesting. So let's talk about how the idea for the movie is launched from something as small as a lost button. How did you come up with that? It feels super simple, but it sure spirals into complexity pretty quickly.
Yeah, I can speak to that quickly, Freddie, and then you can jump in. Again, we were not trying to steal too much from the Coen brothers. We love them, and we were trying to, we use them as reference all the time, but we try to take some of the things that they do and kind of twist them and turn them. And the button is actually, and I don't know, Freddie, if you and I even talked about this before, but it's a lot like the coin flip also in No Country for Old Men, where Anton, the bad guy, does a coin toss, and if it is heads or tails, I can't remember which one, but the person who's he's talking to is either going to live or die, and the button rolling is kind of has that same rolling of the dice feel to it when it rolls down the carpet and onto that grate and kind of spins on it. But what's different about ours is that it spins on the grate, it lands, and then it doesn't go into the grate. So that would be kind of the chance right there. Like, okay, well, fate had it that the button, didn't go in the grate, so that's where the story should go. But then we took that and again made Barbara. She had the motivation to flick the button into the grate. So it's almost like she took control of fate at that point. Another funny point about that is that when none of the film, and I think Freddie will get into this, or we can talk about it later, but none of the film had computer generated effects. Everything was done practically. We made a little cardboard ramp for a button and rolled it down on the carpet and onto the grate about 300 times. It took 4 or 5 hours until we got the right take. But it's just everything was done practically, and it was maddening but also exciting.
Freddie, any comments on that?
I mean, I'm just thinking about how much of a pain it was to roll that button on a carpet. It took forever. And it was after a whole day of shooting. We had to wrap the entire crew, and we knew it was going to take a long time. But I think we were up, way past midnight, just rolling that button over 300 times, like my dad said. But we really just loved this button being yet another moment of choice. And, Barbara, the character protagonist, has a choice to make there. When the button lands on the grate, is she going to flick it into the grate, or is she going to pick it up and, do the right thing? And we just really love the notion of having this entire film be about choice in every sense, and about change, what the AFI application film was about, which is a change of heart. Will she have a change of heart? What is she going to do? And what are the repercussions of those decisions? So we just had a lot of fun with that.
Let's talk about you two working together. How does being a father and son team influence your writing and production process? And do you guys always agree creatively?
We're super lucky, I think, because my dad taught me stop motion animation when I was 9 years old. And so I would just spend hours in my garage animating puppets frame by frame. And my mom is also an artist, so she was in the room with me clicking the frames. And so I didn't get too lonely in there. But because my dad and I started co-writing when I was 9, I developed probably the exact same taste as him because he showed me all of his favorite films and they became my favorite films. And so when we're writing, we actually never get in disagreements about what's on the page. The only disagreements come when I'm editing the film and he comes in as the fresh eyes after, a 10-hour day of editing, and he tells me what's not working. And that's when we get in our arguments. But other than that, when we're writing, it's a very smooth process.
Yeah. And I would just say that it's very strange because it is kind of a 1 + 1 = 3 in us working together in terms of each of us having input and then getting something that's much better than what we would have come up with on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always it always leads to unexpected results. I'm always surprised by where our discussions go. They kind of leapfrog, and our brains are so similar. And I think it's frankly just biology. I think that's just because we're related. It's almost like twins. When twins can finish each other's sentences, I think we have the same kind of thing, thankfully. But it is almost like I can access a dormant part of my brain with Freddy. Like there's just he'll say something. I'll say, that's exactly, that was in the back of my head somewhere. And you just said what I was going to say. So it's just, and I feel very blessed to be able to work with my son. I mean, I think a lot of parents would love to work with their kids. And I do also want to say that I did not push this on him. And he will admit to this, that I was not a father who was saying, you have to get into filmmaking. You have to, he had other interests. I was fully supportive. He wanted to be a roller coaster designer at one point. I was supportive of that.
I should have been a roller coaster designer. I would have been an engineer and probably made more money. But
yeah, that's right.
But he was at a very early age, always telling me, "Are you sure you want to be in film? Are you sure? You sure you want to have this passion?" But it just became my passion, and I think it became my passion because I didn't fall in love with filmmaking for the technical aspects. Even though I love stop motion animation, I loved it because he taught me how to tell a story very early on too. And when I wanted to animate a little ball rolling around on the floor, he was like, "No, you should do something that has a beginning, middle, and an end, and an ending that subverts expectations." And I think being taught that so early on was invaluable, and also a big reason why we have a very similar way of writing, because that's always in our mind. We always want to subvert what the audience is thinking.
I did not use the word subvert expectations when he was
9. Now, the film hinges on 3 very life-altering decisions. Why this story structure, and what challenges did it present in directing and storytelling?
We had an incredibly hard time turning the short into a feature. And once we got that advice from Joel, we were immediately thinking, what could this larger narrative be? Because with a short film, things can be very contained. You don't have to explain where the character is coming from or where they're going. And with the feature, you need to build all that in, and not only do that, but continue to escalate things in a way that builds upon the short film. And we knew we wanted the short film part of the film to be the inciting incident that sets things in motion. So we were trying to figure out how are we going to turn this into a feature, and we did about 20 drafts of a linear version of the film, where we start with the short and things just move continuously from that point. And we were developing it while I was still at AFI. And on the 20th draft, we got the same notes that we got on the first draft after a year and a half of writing.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just devastated, and we were like, this isn't going to work. And so we threw it out and started brainstorming entirely new concepts for different movies, and didn't even think that the So Torn feature was a possibility. But we just kept coming back to it. It was just, I think Joel's advice was just ringing in our heads all the time, maybe even subconsciously. And we knew we had to figure it out. And I remember distinctly, we had one brainstorm walk where we really thought about what the short film is about. And it was very obvious, because we were like, oh, it's about the application prompt. It's this change of heart. And once we remembered that, we realized she really only has 3 choices that she could make on this road. She could commit the perfect crime, she could call the police, or she could drive away. What if we explored all 3 of those choices and the repercussions of each, and see where Barbara can go as a character when she's pushed in each of those paths? And so once we figured that out, we did another 20 drafts of that, but it was a lot more fun because we knew it was the right direction.
From beginning to end, and you can choose what the beginning would be on this until you wrap this up and you had the whole film done. How long did that take?
Oh my gosh, it took a very long time. So the short film was made when I was 18 years old, and the feature film came out when I was 23, and premiering at a festival, and now I'm 24. So it's just, I think that kind of shows how long it took to get it from short to feature. It took a very long time.
I want to talk about one of my personal favorite parts of the movie, and these are the thread-based Rube-Goldberg-esque rigs. They are incredible. Can you walk us through how you engineered those and how you tested them before the shoot?
Everything in the film is practical. And there's two reasons for that. One is we love things that are practical. And when I say practical, I mean there's no computer generated effects. Everything is done in camera. There are no tricks that are added later, digitally. So that was really important to us. And the second piece of that is, we didn't have a huge budget, so we didn't have the money anyway to do computer effects, even if we wanted to. So what was interesting is when we wrote the script, and once we locked it, it was ready to go. And the actors, we had brought actors on, and the money was coming in, and everyone was doing it based on what we had written. And we were kind of like, okay, now it's time for us to figure out how these set pieces work. Like, do they, what are we, it was kind of like a moment where we realized, oh my God, these things have to actually work. They're not going to, we can't cheat them. And so we literally, got in the car, drove to, Joann Fabrics, got thread, got cardboard, got glue, and brought it home, and in the dining room and in our backyard started building these contraptions. And, they would fail, and then we'd do it again, and they would fail, and then we'd do it again, it would work. And we then, once they were all working, we filmed them with our cell phone and shared them with the cast and the crew so that they could see that these things actually do work, and that they could also understand what we needed to do on set. And then for Eve, who plays Barbara, she really needed to know how to make some of these things, like the dart gun that she has, really does work. So we trained her how to, roll the paper a certain way, how to take a needle and put it on with a little, what do you call the little like funnel piece that she tapes to it that fits, it's got to fit in that rolled paper a certain way, so it's got enough pressure. And so she got really good at it and started shooting it around her house and, showing us that she could do it, which was fantastic. So I guess the just to kind of cap this off, everything was done practically. And we do get a lot of comments from people, a lot of people who are actually in the sewing world saying, well, there's no way thread can pull guns like that. And they're upholstery thread. And they were supplied to us by our, Metler, which is one of our sponsors. So everything worked.
It for those who haven't seen the movie yet, it is the fact that none of this was CG at all. It was real life. It's pretty amazing. It really is.
Wow.
Now I want to talk about one of the more inventive elements of the film, which really struck me, and that's the embroidered talking portraits. They were beautiful, somewhat unsettling, and incredibly original. How did your concept for this come about? And talk about your collaboration with BERNINA for making these come to life.
We love characters who are stuck in some way. And for Barbara, she's stuck in her past. She lives in this fabric store that was her mother's. Her mother has since passed, and it's essentially a time capsule. And we wanted to invent a product that could be sold in her fabric store that would also represent her stuckness. And we came up with these talking portraits, which are these embroidered portraits that have an audio component similar to a birthday card with audio. And when you pull a thread, that audio plays. And for Barbara, she has all these talking portraits around her with audio of her mother telling her, how to navigate her day as a child, etc. And we just love that as a concept because it just felt like the perfect externalization of Barbara's stuckness. And working with Bernina was incredible because they helped make all of these embroidered portraits practically. And I think it took about, a few million stitches to make them. And I'm just astounded by the quality. And it has this wonderfully nostalgic feeling to them, which is what we really wanted to achieve.
Those should really be a thing.
We thought about, like, early on, we were like, we really need to come up with a product that could be real.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to say about Bernina, those guys were unbelievable. When we first met them, we got a tour of their factory in Switzerland. They were so excited and optimistic and positive about what we were doing. As Freddy said, they stitched all of those portraits, and I remember we would send them, we'd send them one because it was a photograph we would send them, and then they would convert it in their software for their machines. And at no time did they say, "Hey, stop sending me those photographs," because we had a lot. We kind of said, well, they're going to be maybe 6, maybe 10, and it took weeks for them to make those. But they never said to me, "Hey, Fred, can you please stop sending us photographs?" They were just, and they had a dedicated person who was on it full time watching the machines to make sure that the stitching was done correctly. And I also just want to say that they dedicated all of, whatever equipment we needed in terms of their sewing machines. They gave us even one of their, historical machines that was part of their archive that we put in Barbara's bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't speak highly enough of them. And they also, which was also a very selfless thing to do, they introduced us to Metler, which is the thread company. Bernina didn't have to do that. They were our sponsor. They didn't have to bring in another sponsor, but they were like, talk to Metler. They will give you guys free thread and free, displays. And we did that. And Metler came in and they were absolutely fantastic as well. So it was incredible to have both these companies supporting us.
I'm so glad you think that the talking portraits could be a real product too, by the way. We've heard that a lot, and maybe, we got to do it at some point.
We won't be surprised when that happens. Let's talk about the location where a lot of this took place. It was kind of a quirky, small town atmosphere in Switzerland. Your actors came from all over the world. Let's talk about how the location shaped your vision and what it was like working within that.
Yeah, so my mom is half Swiss, so we all have Swiss passports, and I went to high school in Switzerland. And so when I was in high school there, we made a lot of shorts. I wanted to meet everyone I possibly could in the Swiss film industry, which is a very tiny industry. But I met my incredible cinematographer, Sebastian Klinger, who has become, we work with him on everything now. He shot the short film and now the feature. And when we shot the short, we just needed a road for the short, a desolate road in the Alps. And when we were going to shoot the feature, we knew we had to go back to that exact same road just because it was so perfect and we fell in love with it. But Sebastian, while we were writing, discovered a town just up that road. And so he was starting to location scout while we were writing, which was incredible because we were able to see pictures he was taking in that town and write locations around it on the page. And Sebastian is just an incredible cinematographer, and he's also a producer on the film. And he was meeting all these people who were excited about the idea of us shooting in their homes, and were even offering us gifts to shoot in their homes for free. And he found that empty storefront that we could use as a fabric store, but he even found, he talked to the owner about us doing a practical explosion in his store and he could not have been more excited about us exploding his store, practically. So there was this warmth that we knew we had to shoot there. And we also knew on the page that we were going to be creating this heightened fictitious world with an international cast. We love films that do that. In the Wes Anderson world, where you kind of have creative liberty to lean into more heightened set pieces. So once we discovered that town and the enthusiasm for us to shoot there, we knew we had to shoot there.
Were there any locals in any of the scenes?
There are. We have a taxi driver. We have a bunch of extras in the diner. And again, there was so much enthusiasm. They were just so excited to sit in that diner for days on end, silently.
And the waitress at the diner, I mean, she was a local. And she was great. She was fantastic.
Yeah, they were all so enthusiastic, which is very special, and nothing that you can ever get in Los Angeles, for example.
Barbara's journey, there's a mythical quality about it. It's part thriller, actually a lot thriller, part fable. Were there any influences you drew on when you were shaping her arc?
I can jump into this first. I mean, we love stories that pursue the tension between a physical want and an emotional need. And for us, we wanted to push Barbara in each of these stories and see what happens when she gets what she wants, which is the briefcase full of cash to save her store, but not what she really needs, which is to let go of the store that traps her. And so in each of these three stories, we wanted to explore what happens when Barbara, gets what she wants, but not what she needs, and vice versa. And I think that also very much ties to No Country for Old Men and another film that we love, which is Run Lola Run, which also very directly explores fate and choice. And so we really wanted to play with that, and in the end, directly juxtapose what happens when Barbara lets go of the store versus what happens when she gets the cash.
So much of this film is nonverbal. What led you to rely so heavily on image and physicality instead of dialogue?
We had a lot of dialogue that we actually ended up cutting out. And a lot of it was Barbara, Eve's dialogue. And I think what happened was, it was just a really nice surprise, is that we knew she was a great actress, but we didn't know that she could carry a scene with expression only. And there's one scene in particular where she's in her bedroom talking to the helmeted motorcycle guy who she's just dragged up there. And there was a lot of dialogue that we had written for that scene. And once Freddy started editing it, we were just like, we don't need it. Her eyes are telling the story. And so I think just her face, got rid of a lot of the dialogue, which is kind of a bummer when you spend all this time doing dialogue and this is a brilliant line and we can't wait for her to say that. But she didn't need to say it. So I think this is just it's a perfect example of an actor reducing their lines through expression.
And I think another big element of it too was Eve's audition was very visual. The first thing she did was, in her apartment over Zoom, she pretended to drive through the crime scene with, no dialogue. And I was just calling out physical direction to her, like, okay, a motorcycle is passing you on the right, now you see these downed men on the road. And by the end of that sequence, she was almost, I think she was in tears. And I was like, this is incredible. And I was so moved by her performance, despite there being no dialogue. And I think that was always in the back of our mind. And her second audition, there's a critical scene at the end of the film. I don't want to spoil it, but there's this huge dance that occurs. And she had to do that dance fully improvised in her bedroom as well. And that dance is very important because it's simultaneously setting up a complex thread scheme, but also an emotional catharsis. And she did all that with very little direction, just by showing her visual storytelling. So it was very special to work with her.
So continuing on the theme of no dialogue, sound design and score carried a huge emotional weight in those scenes. Can you talk about your process using music to give voice to Barbara's inner world? And my personal question is, how did you choose the music she'd listen to in the car?
Yeah, we had so much fun working with our composer, Jacob Tardien, and he's incredible. He works really like on other no other composer I've ever seen, because he wanted to define the sound of the film before we were on set. And so months prior to shooting, we were defining that sound, and he was sending us versions and uh, trying to figure out what is this heightened world really like. And Jacob was incredible because he loved the idea of using practical sewing machine noises and thread noises and scissors, etc. And so once he created the sound that you hear in the film, he used like a musical saw, which is literally a saw with a bow. It was just so specific, and we knew that was the sound of the movie. And he actually created a bunch of different tracks that we also distributed to the cast and crew. So everyone was on the same page about what this movie sounds like. And Jacob came to set and was composing on set as well. So he was really a key component in defining the tone of the movie. And regarding the old music that we hear in Barbara's car, that was yet another way to show Barbara's stuckness through sound. And she drives this old Fiat 500 that her mom had, and there's only one switch in the car that goes to one radio station. It's quite absurd, but we loved that she's forced to listen to her mom's music, and we love that notion.
Was there a particular scene that was especially challenging to convey nonverbally? And if so, how did you solve that?
I can speak to this a little bit. I think the scene of Barbara coming upon the drug deal gone bad was, I mean, it had to be without dialogue. I mean, if you can imagine, you've watched the film, so you know the scene. If you can imagine that there was dialogue at any point of that, it would have just ruined everything. I mean, if you can imagine one of the motorcycle guys saying, "Hey, lady, what are you doing?" Or, Barbara saying, "Now you guys, stand still." I mean, it would just, it would ruin it. It would ruin the entire moment. So we knew that entire, and I don't know, how long is that, Freddy? Is that 5 or 6 minutes?
Yeah.
Like 5 or 6 minutes of no dialogue. It was interesting. There's two things going on. There's the audience in the heads of the being in the minds of the motorcycle guys on the ground. Like you're with them. You're like wondering, what is this woman doing? And then there's Barbara, who is scheming, and she's 5 steps ahead of us. She's 5 steps ahead of the audience, and she's 5 steps ahead of the motorcycle guys. So it's as if we're lying there in the street also with them, trying to understand what is she going to do. And I think, again, being without any dialogue was so important, because it was really just watching her, do her things and not know what she's up to. I mean, I think the key there is, I don't think anybody that we've shown that the short film, which was that same inciting incident or the feature, I don't think anyone can say that they know what's going to happen there.
Another point on that is it was very challenging on the page in terms of the script, because it was a bold choice to have your protagonist commit a perfect crime on page 5, minute 5 of the film, and have to convince the audience that, to root for her. And so a big conversation we had with Eve is we want this to be nonverbal, but how can you win the audience over with your visual performance? And I don't know how she did it, but thankfully, once we were editing the film, we didn't get many notes saying that people were immediately detached from her as a character.
So for those of us who are not in the world of filming and producing films, you tell three very distinct stories. When you were filming this, did you film each one in its entirety, or did you mix and match scenes? How does that work, and what's that like?
It was incredibly difficult because we had a schedule that was entirely out of order. So, and I was the script supervisor on the film, which is the person who looks for continuity mistakes. So it was incredibly taxing because we would jump from each of the three stories and have to remember not only the physical continuity, but the emotional continuity of every single individual character and setup. And then we had to introduce all these thread Rube-Goldberg schemes on top of that, which made everything 10 times more complicated. So it was all over the place. And thankfully, because we had such a talented crew and our cast was just so versatile, they were able to nail it every time. And I rarely had to say, wait, we're in this story now. You got to change that. They all made my life very easy.
Do you have any special behind the scenes stories that you can share with us about a funny thing that happened or an interesting thing that happened that nobody would know unless you told us about it?
I have one that I like to say, to tell. John Lynch, who plays, the dad, the bad dad. He he's an incredible actor who was in character the entire time we were shooting. He didn't come out of character, even when we were taking breaks or eating. It was just his way of doing it, and it's really scary. It's like to have because he plays a scary guy, and when you have a scary guy who is eating lunch with you, you're just like, and I didn't know John very well until later in the project. So, those early lunches, I was kind of, this guy, is he like happy to be here? Did someone force him into this role? Is he, and I'll remember one thing that happened on set is there's the ending of the film in the diner where he does this very long kind of monologue, which is wonderful. And Freddy let the camera run the entire time. We didn't stop him. He had memorized everything. He was like going off of everything in the script. Sometimes he would change a few words. Sometimes he would mix sentences a little bit, but it was perfect what he did. And the wonderful Swiss woman who played the waitress, who was not, had not been in a lot of movies. I don't know if she had ever done a movie before. She was in theater. John was doing his big monologue. The set was dead quiet not only because we had to be, but because he was scary. Eve was shaking because he was so scary. And he started changing a few of the words in the script. And the poor Swiss woman actress stopped him and said, "I think you're off script." And we all got even more quiet. And John just looked at her and said something that was just, I don't remember what he said exactly, but it was something that just made everybody like cringe. And the poor woman just, she was just trying to help. She had memorized all of his lines basically. And it was just a very tense, moment that he then after everything was done, he came out of character and he apologized to everybody. But man, I mean, when you're a method actor and you're in it, you don't want to cut them off during their lines. That's for sure.
Sure.
And they were Calum, who's opposite of him in that scene, his son. They were both so in it and so method in their performances. It was very easy for us because we, like my dad said, we would just roll the camera. And John's long monologue in the film was his first take. And I was too scared to ask him to do a second take. So he did that. And I was, I watched the playback several times and I was like, I don't need to do another one. And Calum was the same. We just did it and he nailed it on the first take. So that was very special to just watch that when you have two or three incredible actors just sitting at a table. It's just it makes the directing very easy because I just have to try to capture it.
When you watch him, I don't know if you've noticed this, but when he's so angry and he's talking and he's eating, there are shots where food is coming out of his mouth onto Eve. Like he's like, I mean, and she's like getting the food on her. I mean, it's subtle, but it's like, he was so in it and so angry at the, what was happening in the scene that, food was literally landing on Eve's cheek. It was like from his, and it just made her even more like terrified and disgusted.
Yeah.
What's next for each of you, and what are your dreams?
I would love to just continue to make original movies with my dad. I think that's the goal, is just to continue working together, writing projects that are original, that are our voice. And we have one now that we have written, and we're hoping to continue to move it forward. But that one will take place in Brazil because my mom is also half Brazilian. So we're just kind of following my mom. It just makes sense for us to go there next. But I think the dream is to continue to keep making things as a father-son team, for me anyways.
My dream is to have a slightly bigger budget for the next film. This was it was all friends and family money, and support from BERNINA and Metler. But it would be nice to have a little bit more money because we were pushing it, that's for sure.
In our conversation today, we covered a lot of ground. Is there any question I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
You are just incredible. I'm like, this has been such a great experience talking to you, and I'm floored. I'm trying to think. You've covered everything. Has she missed anything, Dad?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I would want to be asked. I don't know. You have hit everything.
Well, I have pages of my own personal questions, pages and pages, but we'll leave that for another conversation. It's been wonderful talking with you both. Your movie is amazing. It was an honor to talk to you today, and I want to thank you for your time. Now, as our listeners might like to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, we have a website. It's Macdonald Entertainment Partners, and there's a contact form on there. That's the best way. But yeah, we're super excited to have the film out in the world now, and we're just so appreciative that you took the time to watch it multiple times and talk with us. It means a lot.
It does. It's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Fred and Freddy, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you again for everything.
Thank you so much.
Well, we've heard about the vision and collaboration behind So Torn from Freddy and Fred Macdonald. Now it's time to hear from the remarkable actor at the center of it all. Eve Conley's performance as Barbara is equal parts powerful, vulnerable, and unforgettable. She brings depth and presence to a character who speaks little, but says so much. Eve, we are thrilled to have you with us. Welcome to So-and-So.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We've got a lot we can dig into, and I just want to start with your character, Barbara. She is layered, she's grieving, she's surviving, and definitely inventing. So what drew you to her when you first read the script?
Yeah, well, I read the script and I saw the short film at the same time. And so what immediately struck me was she seems like such an innocent, kind of meek character, but then you pretty quickly see her do some pretty dark things, and you see almost immediately that she can be really ruthless. And that kind of juxtaposition really intrigued me. And I wanted to just kind of know, what was her reasoning? Why was she doing these things? This woman who seemed so normal, doing the most crazy things, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was probably her drastic actions. I wanted to know what were driving those actions. That's probably what intrigued me the most.
So, your first conversation with Freddy and Fred about the role, tell us about that.
Yeah, I think it was in the initial audition, which I did over Zoom. And I just remember thinking they were both such lovely people. And the first thing I remember them saying to me is, in the short film, you immediately see kind of Barbara's cunning side and her kind of strategic genius. But what they said to me about what they were doing with the feature is they wanted to give Barbara more emotional depth. And that was kind of the main thing that they wanted to make clear to me, is that the journey we were going on here with the feature was really about giving her a backstory and giving her reasons, and making the audience understand from an emotional point where she was coming from. That was really the thing I remember them saying first off.
So that early dialogue really helped shape your approach to Barbara.
Yeah. And honestly, that was kind of the main thing that we talked about a lot, me and Freddie, even throughout it, was that her backstory. Because for Barbara, you see her do, a lot of drastic, quite dark things, maybe questionable to a lot of people. But what he was really clear on is that once we understood her backstory and her reasoning, which is her relationship with her mother, everything Barbara does is for her mother. And for me personally, once I understood that side of her, that made it a lot easier to play, because to me, that's understandable. I mean, for my mom, I would do anything, So I think that was really pivotal in my ability to play her then, and to make sure that the character had that emotional truth.
So, before arriving on set, you talked about getting ready with her backstory.
Mm.
Did you use any specific techniques to access her emotional space?
That's an interesting question, because I think like years of working as an actor, that's something I've gone back and forth. Do I have these, specific things that I do? But I found that what works for me is to find the thing that I identify with. So for Barbara, it would have been that relationship with her mother and her strong feelings for her mother. And then to honestly do that work in the lead up to it. But then once I'm on set, I'm not thinking about it. I'm not bringing that in. I'm someone who, when I'm working, I like to be, just talking and having fun right up until they say action. Because for me, that's how I keep my kind of emotions the freshest, as opposed to trying to hold on to something and keep it going. And then I just try and, once they call action, be in the moment. I know those things about Barbara that I've talked with Freddie. And so I really just try and listen to whoever I'm in the scene with, and just let my emotions happen naturally.
So, in this clip, you're talking with Josh, who is Hudson's son, and Hudson is the dad and the kingpin of all of this. And Josh's actions were clearly a catalyst for what happened in the story. So let's listen.
I'm impressed with your seamstress skills. Really. You're a natural.
I don't even like thread.
Seems like we both have the wrong occupations.
Forced to be a drug dealer.
Forced to be a mobile seamstress.
No.
So why do it?
That's all I know.
And the voices in the box.
It's my mom and a younger me. We would dance to it, and it's the last one we recorded. It's hard to listen to.
So, Eve, what about this exchange is pivotal to the whole story?
Yeah, I think this is kind of the turning point for Barbara. It's funny, this was actually possibly my favorite scene to film, because I think, as we have talked about, Barbara's kind of drive throughout the film is this connection to her mother, and that's actually keeping her stuck. Barbara is stuck in her life. She has lived her life for her mother, and now that her mother is no longer with her, she doesn't really know the way forward, and she's still trying to live a life that is really for someone who's not around. And I think this moment is really the first time where she's kind of questioning her choices and questioning, is this path that she is going down full force, if it's even the right path? And it's really that moment where there's self-reflection for the first time in the film. So I think it's really the turning point for Barbara and the start of her journey to let go of her mother, really, and move on.
You know, it's one of my favorite parts of that clip is when Barbara says, "I don't even like thread."
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought, boy, that says a lot. Exactly what you just explained. So this role is incredibly physical, and yet a lot of Barbara's strength is expressed in silence. So, how did you approach those long nonverbal scenes where so much is felt but not spoken?
Yeah, we actually, Freddie, the way he directed me was almost every scene, even though there was no dialogue, it still had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And for me, he was always very clear with me about what Barbara's emotional journey was in that scene. So even though I wasn't, saying lines physically, in my head, I was going through an emotional arc, and I knew what needed to be told in that story. And so I could play those beats, even if, I wasn't saying words.
You know, what's beautiful about that is the silence is almost uncomfortable,
Mm,
and that really comes across in these nonverbal scenes. I want to talk about some of the rigs that Fred and Freddy put together.
yeah.
Barbara uses thread. It's a weapon and a tool and a metaphor. So let's talk about how you learned to handle those rigs and props. I understand nothing was computer generated. It was all an actual thing, and they were amazing. So talk about that.
Yeah, I so before filming, Freddie actually sent me videos of himself and his dad, Freddie, and also his mom. Sometimes she would be in the videos where they did every contraption that Barbara does in the film. Fred and Freddie worked that out. They just spent like months, I'm pretty sure, in their house, in their back garden, working out how these rigs would work. And then once they had that all figured out, they videoed themselves exactly as Barbara is in the movie, but it's just them in their house at home. And then they sent me those videos, and they were basically like how-tos of how to do each contraption that Barbara does. And then I would just sit in my house and watch these videos and practice by myself, because leading up to the film, I had never sewed. I knew nothing about it. I was quite anxious because I didn't feel I was particularly, gifted when it came to being delicate and doing intricate movements. So I was quite nervous about that. But really, all the videos they sent me, I think there must have been 3 or 4 of just everything Barbara does, and I just practiced it over and over again. And to be honest, it was the same with the sewing. I mean, Barbara really only, even though she's a seamstress, she only sews one thing in the film. So I just practiced that as well, sewing a button, and that's the one thing I can do. I can't do any more sewing, but I can do everything that Barbara does in the film.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you sew, and that button, and Fred and Freddy and I talked about the how that is integral to the whole story. So you can sew buttons now.
I can sew buttons. That's the extent of it, but I can't do that.
There is a scene in the movie where you do an intricate dance, and almost when you start watching it, you're not quite sure what's going on, and then you realize. Talk about how you felt during that scene and what it was like to do that dance. That was really something.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that dance was actually in the callback audition. That was what again, it was over Zoom, and they just sent me, my agent, an email saying, we want her to do this dance. And they sent me a reference video, and I'm not sure what the reference video was now, but they sent me some sort of reference video, and they sent me this song, and they said, can you dance as Barbara? Just kind of be free with it, do an improv dance and kind of show her emotional journey through the dance. So I had to do that in over a Zoom call for them. And I kind of, if I'm being completely honest, that's kind of the way I dance. Like, I'm not the best dancer, so I just throw myself around. And so that's what I did for the callback. And then we spoke about it briefly, but there was no choreography. There was no real talk of the dance. Freddy was like, I don't want it to seem like Barbara's a dancer. I don't want it to seem choreographed. So he was just kind of like, I want you to just kind of do what you did in that callback. And so we didn't talk about it. It was near the end of filming, if I'm correct, or at least, 2 weeks in. And we didn't speak about the dance at all. And I kept thinking, oh my God, I can't believe he's really not going to choreograph this. I'm going to humiliate myself in front of everyone. But what he was very clear on is the emotional point, which Freddy was always very clear on, the emotional point that is in the story, and Barbara's emotional journey of that dance. So she is starting out trying to just distract them from looking at her feet, but it's also the first time that she's properly listened to this recording since her mom has died. So while it starts out as a distraction, it is an emotional journey, and it really is another step on her letting go of her mother and her kind of stopping being afraid of confronting her grief and her pain. And so it was really about that. Yeah.
It's quite the release it absolutely. And for you, as you explained, it just came naturally to dance that way.
Yeah. For better or for worse. Yeah.
Sure.
That is the way I dance. Obviously I did have a reference video, and it was, I knew he wanted it to be quite crazy. So I was amping it up. Really, I have to say, I think we just did 2 takes full out, and I was exhausted by the end of it.
Indeed. So you mentioned in the press materials how breathtaking Switzerland was. Did filming in that quiet, very remote setting impact your performance or help you access Barbara's isolation?
Yes, I would say it actually did, because it was so beautiful. You would look out the window, you would forget almost, and then every so often you would look out and it would just be like a painting, like it didn't feel real. But then at the same time, I was in Switzerland, in a room by myself, and I didn't have my family, and obviously the cast and crew were all so lovely, but there was a sense of that isolation, which I do think subconsciously worked its way in, but I don't think I was conscious of it as we were filming.
So in the film, there is, I'm going to call it a haunting stillness to that town.
Yeah.
So that really had an effect on your emotional and creative state while filming?
I think it did. And if I am not mistaken, that town, like, there were very few people in it, and they were all very open to us filming there, and they, gave allowed us to come in and film in like their houses if we needed it, and so there was a lovely community there, and that was felt as well. But I definitely think there are a couple of scenes when we're like out in the wilderness. There's a particular scene where I'm running away from Hudson and through the forest, and it's quite a scary scene in the film, and I think that scene in particular, it was quite scary, because we had some of the crew there, but it was getting dark, and it really did feel almost overwhelming, the sense of the place. So I think scenes like that, is particularly the outdoor scenes, you can really feel it.
So looking back now after the film wrapped, what part of Barbara stayed with you?
Oh God, it's the part that to me, I've always been most similar to Barbara, and so I think is probably the thing that will stay. Maybe it was there before, is just that probably just very strong connection to my mother, and that like driving you on forward, and influeing the decisions you make. But at the same time, I think that the main thing that will stick with me is just the fact that I did it. And for me, it was quite an intimidating role, because it was the lead in a project that I felt was so had the potential to be so great, and I had a lot of overwhelming worry that I would be the one to drop the ball, and that was a fear of mine. And Barbara is so, physical. She's so emotional. She has so many facets to her that I felt I needed to do justice to, and I think that finding that I was capable of that, and also I had a long-standing belief that I'm not particularly good at dexterous. Is that the right word? And so I had a lot of nerves coming into it that I wouldn't be able to seem as skilled as Barbara needed to be. And I discovered that actually I am, and I'm actually quite naturally good at it. And there were certain moves like Barbara's thread when she does the loop and puts it around the gun trigger under the table, and that was something that nobody was able to do, so they were thinking, oh, we'll just cheat it. And then I ended up being able to do it in one attempt, and so I discovered that actually I had a real talent for things like that, which I had
Nice.
never assumed that I would have. So I think that kind of it was like a renewed sense of belief in myself for a number of the skills and attributes that Barbara has that I didn't think I had, but actually playing her, I found I did have.
Now, did she change the way you approach future roles?
I think in terms of, again, that confidence and you had asked about the emotional moments and how I played, how I kind of approach those. And I think for a long time I had doubted my, I don't want to say process, because there's something about that word, but it is my process in approaching those emotional scenes, is that I always thought I knew what I needed to get to that performance, but I was afraid to confidently believe that once I just did what I needed to do, I'd be able to bring the performance I needed. But I found that this role helped me to kind of solidify what worked for me, and to have the confidence to be like, no, it will work, and I can do this. And once I do the work leading up to it, and then I'm present in the moment, that's what works best for me. And I think up until this point I had worried that I was doing everything wrong, I guess. And so I think that Barbara in a lot of ways gave me a lot of confidence in myself as an actor as well.
What was your favorite part of filming?
Oh my God, it's so difficult to choose. I think honestly, this group of people, the cast, the crew, Freddy, my God, as I'm sure you're already aware as you met him, but Freddy is the nicest guy you will ever meet. And he is one of my favorite directors I've ever worked with. And that his like energy, he was always in a good mood. And that really like trickled down to everyone on the set. And the cast and crew are just the loveliest group of people. I had the two best hair and makeup stylists, and we would sing High School Musical every morning in the hair and makeup room, and like it was just such a like it felt like I mean we don't really have summer camp as much in Ireland, but that's what it felt like. It was such a lovely environment filled with people who just all really believed in the project and wanted to be there. And yeah, it was honestly just a joy the whole way through, but the people really made it.
So that was your favorite part of filming. What is your favorite part of the movie? Anything different than that clip that we played earlier?
That's interesting. I will say, I really love that scene because, but I think I half love that scene because, I loved acting it. I mean, I loved, in the same way that I loved in the short, that her initial plan of action and the way that she sets up the two men, and like the perfect crime. I think that's just genius. Every contraption she does is genius, and I love that whole sequence, and I love the way it turned out, and the light was so beautiful. And we had, we filmed all the things on that road, if I'm not mistaken, on one day. And there was weather issues coming up to it. There was so much stress, which again, Freddy took in his stride, because I would have been very stressed out, but he seemed to handle it perfectly. But there was so much that went into that day. And then seeing it on the screen, like the light is beautiful in that scene in that entire sequence, and it just looks so cinematic and beautiful, and I love that sequence.
So are there any behind the scenes stories or experiences you can share with us that people wouldn't know about?
The car. Oh my God, did I love that car. And that, if I'm not mistaken, they just saw it, like they happened to come across the woman who owns that car and asked, could they use the car for the film? And she just gave it for the length of the film, and then they gave it back to her because everyone wanted that car. I mean, I think Carolyn was about to buy the car. She was about to make an offer on it. Like, it was so beautiful. But that car, it was so lucky that I drive, and because I'm Irish, I drive manual. So I was able to drive that car, but that car has its own personality, and it's very sensitive, the gear sticks and everything. So there were a couple of times when I very nearly drove off the edge of a cliff on that car.
No.
And there was one time in particular, and the cinematographer, Sebastian, like, he really just had to have so much trust in me, because there were a lot of times where it was just me and him in the car. And there was one time in particular that I almost drove off the car, and we just were both like, okay, we're just going to move on from that. And I would say the car is the main thing. It was just such a unique car, and I wish I could own it, but sadly it's gone back to the original owner.
So that car was a real thing. It wasn't a prop that they made for the movie.
No.
Oh, wow.
No, yeah, it's someone's car.
So Eve, what's next for you, and what's your dream?
Oh my God. I am actually writing, and it has been my dream. I grew up loving movies, and so I absolutely love acting, but I also love writing. And my dream one day is to write and direct. But at the moment, my focus is really writing, and I'm developing a series with the producer here in Ireland, and I'm really just taking the time, because during the pandemic I went back to study writing, and since then I've been, really taking the time to kind of perfect my craft. And so that's what I've been working towards. And so hopefully, coming up, the two series that I'm working on writing will, get through all the many, barriers that you have to jump through when you're in development. But hopefully that would be next, something that I write and I would be able to bring it to life.
We're going to keep our eyes open for that.
Thank you so much.
In our conversation today, is there any question I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
No, I think you asked everything.
Perfect. Eve, it has been wonderful to talk to you today.
Thank you so much.
As our listeners would like to reach out to you, is there a good way for them to do so?
Oh my God, that's so interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I guess Instagram. I'm very active on Instagram, and it's just Eve Connolly on Instagram.
Perfect. Eve, thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
You might say that this is what I needed all along. To let go of the store. To let go of Mom. That despite being so torn, I somehow found my way. Would you have chosen a similar path? Or would you have taken a different road?
Good night, sweetie. Good night, Mommy. All right, hey, I'll dream of you. You dream of me, okay?
The sewing machine, a girl's best friend. If I didn't have my sewing machine, I'd have come to no good end.
What an incredible journey. From stitches to storylines, from a bold father and son vision to a breakout performance that sews it all together. So Torn is more than a film. It's a testament to the power of craft, creativity, and the courage to make bold choices. A heartfelt thank you to Freddy and Fred Macdonald for sharing the remarkable story behind their film and for bringing such ingenuity and emotional depth to the screen. And to Eve Conley, thank you for joining us and for your unforgettable performance as Barbara. Your portrayal brought grace, grit, and so much humanity to this one-of-a-kind story. You can now pre-order So Torn on Apple TV for release on June 13th.
Machine is a girl!
If you know someone you think has an outstanding story, a story that should be shared on this podcast, please drop me a note to meg@soandsopodcast.com or complete the form on our website. Be sure to subscribe to, review, and rate this podcast on your favorite platform. and visit our website, soandsopodcast.com, for more information about today's and all of our guests. That's SEWANDSO podcast.com. And finally, I want to thank BERNINA for making this program possible. I'm Meg Goodman, and I look forward to you joining us next time on So and So.